June 13, 1982. Wireless Ridge, East Falkland, 0200 hours. 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment advances through darkness toward Argentine positions on the high ground above Port Stanley. Supporting them are armored vehicles, not Chieftain main battle tanks, not Challenger, not any vehicle that any armor manual in the world would describe as suitable for this terrain, this mission, or this role. The vehicles supporting 2 Para on Wireless Ridge weigh 8 tons each. They are powered by engines derived from a civilian Jaguar saloon car. They are named after a scorpion and a sword. They look from any angle like something a child might draw when asked to sketch a tank. Military professionals who had seen them dismissed them as toys. Argentine planners who had been briefed on British capabilities dismissed them as irrelevant in terrain this severe. 4 Scorpions and 4 Scimitars of the Blues and Royals were the entire armored component of the British land force that had sailed 13,000 kilometers to retake the Falkland Islands. 8 vehicles, 64 tons of combined armor, and on the night of June 13th, in the darkness above Port Stanley, their 76mm guns and 30mm cannons tore apart Argentine defensive positions with a precision and volume of fire that the infantry could not have generated alone. By the time the Argentine surrender was signed on June 14th, those 8 vehicles had traversed terrain that professional armor assessments had declared impassable, fought battles that heavier vehicles would have lost before they reached the start line, and contributed to a campaign whose land phase lasted 24 days, from landing to surrender. The toys had won. To understand why 8 light vehicles became the decisive armored component of the entire Falklands campaign, you need to understand the problem that confronted the British task force when it began planning the land assault in April 1982. The Falkland Islands are approximately the size of Wales. They consist primarily of 2 geological features: stone runs, which are rivers of quartzite boulders several meters deep and hundreds of meters wide that cover large areas of open ground, and peat bog, which is waterlogged organic soil of varying depth that behaves like quicksand under sufficient weight. The combination produces terrain that military engineers classify as some of the most hostile to tracked armored vehicles on Earth. A Chieftain, main battle tank weighing 55 tons, would have sunk into the peat on every approach route to Stanley. A Centurion would have done the same. The stone runs would have broken tracks and damaged running gear on any heavily loaded tracked vehicle attempting to cross them. The military consensus, before the campaign began, was that the Falklands ground war would be an infantry fight with artillery support. Armor was not considered viable. The decision to deploy any armored vehicles at all was not universally supported. The vehicles that made the journey were the Combat Vehicle Reconnaissance, tracked, a family of light armored vehicles designed by Alvis in the 1960s on the specific premise that a vehicle capable of operating across the entire range of terrain types found in the British Army's potential operational areas, from the North German plain to the jungles of Borneo, needed to be light enough that its ground pressure would not limit its mobility in soft conditions. The Scorpion carried a 76mm L23A1 gun in a fully rotating turret. The Scimitar carried a 30mm L21A1 Rardin cannon. Both vehicles weighed approximately 8 tons in combat configuration. Both were powered by a Jaguar XK 4.2-liter aluminum inline-6 engine producing between 195 and 210 horsepower. This was the same basic engine fitted to the Jaguar E-Type sports car. The ground pressure of the CVR-T was 0.35 kilograms per square centimeter. A human foot exerts approximately 0.7 kilograms per square centimeter when walking. The CVR-T exerted less pressure on soft ground than a walking soldier. The peat bogs that would have swallowed a Chieftain were, for the Scorpion and Scimitar, simply wet ground. Terrain that the military consensus had declared impassable for armor was passable for these specific vehicles for a reason rooted in their fundamental design. They were designed to go everywhere. In the Falklands, everywhere was exactly where they needed to go. The Blues and Royals, formerly the Royal Horse Guards and 1st Dragoons, were the regiment selected to provide armored support for the land campaign. They loaded 4 Scorpions and 4 Scimitars aboard the requisitioned liner SS Canberra at Southampton on April 9, 1982, 7 days after Argentina's invasion. The vehicles were partially disassembled to fit into the ship's spaces. The crews had days to prepare for a campaign in terrain and conditions that bore no resemblance to anything in their training. The task force sailed. The crews studied maps of the Falklands and planned for contingencies that doctrine said would not arise. They would use their vehicles in darkness, exploiting the image intensification night sights that gave them an advantage over Argentine infantry in pre-dawn operations. They would use their superior firepower to suppress positions that parachute battalions and Royal Marine commandos could not approach under fire. They would go where doctrine said they could not go. The amphibious landing at San Carlos Water on May 21, 1982, established the British beachhead. The 8 CVRTs came ashore by landing craft. The amphibious landing at San Carlos Water on May 21, 1982, established the British beachhead. The 8 CVRTs came ashore by landing craft. The vehicle commanders of the Blues and Royals faced an immediate tactical problem. There was no doctrine for what they were being asked to do. The training manuals covered armored operations in the context of the Central European battle that NATO had prepared for across 3 decades. They did not cover armored reconnaissance in sub-Antarctic peat bogs in support of parachute battalions, conducting dismounted attacks on fortified ridgelines at night, in temperatures approaching 0. The crews improvised. They studied the ground on foot before moving their vehicles. They identified routes through the stone runs by walking them first, prodding for depth and stability. They developed their own techniques for recovering from soft ground quickly enough not to become a stationary target. When Sicupera fought the Battle of Goose Green on May 28 and 29, the CVRTs were not yet forward enough to provide direct support. The battalion fought and won that battle with rifles, machine guns, artillery, and the specific moral courage of men who continued attacking across open ground under fire. The armored component of the task force watched from San Carlos and prepared to move. What follows when armor does not arrive in time to a fight becomes part of the record of what armor's presence prevents. What followed was a ground campaign of extraordinary physical difficulty, conducted across terrain that broke men and equipment indiscriminately. The overland march from San Carlos to the mountains above Stanley covered approximately 80 kilometers through peat bog, across stone runs and over ridgelines at altitudes up to 700 meters, in weather that included rain, sleet, and temperatures below freezing, carrying equipment loads that averaged over 35 kilograms per man. Through this terrain, the 8 CVRTs moved under their own power. They recovered from soft ground repeatedly using their towing equipment. They crossed stone runs that damaged their tracks, repaired the damage in the field, and continued. They were the only armored vehicles in the theater to traverse this terrain successfully, and they arrived at the mountains above Stanley ready to fight. Argentine armor in the Falklands was present but limited. The Argentine Marine Corps had deployed 12 LVT-P-7 amphibious assault vehicles, which had been used in the initial invasion and were subsequently used in a logistics role. There were Panhard AML armored cars with 90mm guns, capable on roads and prepared ground, but significantly limited in the terrain around Stanley. Argentina's more capable armored vehicles, including its AMX-13 light tanks, had not been deployed to the islands. The Argentine garrison was primarily an infantry force with artillery support. Against the Scorpion's 76mm gun and the Scimitar's 30mm Rardin, firing at night through image intensification sights against defenders who had no equivalent night capability. The Argentine infantry positions were at a fundamental tactical disadvantage in the darkness they had counted on for cover. The threat that shaped every aspect of the land campaign was not Argentine armor, it was the Argentine Air Force. Between May 24 and June 8, Argentine aircraft flying from the mainland sank HMS Sheffield, HMS Coventry, HMS Ardent, HMS Antelope, the logistics ship Atlantic Conveyor, and damaged many more vessels. The Atlantic Conveyor's loss was particularly significant for the land campaign. It carried the majority of the heavy lift, Chinook helicopters that had been earmarked to move 5 infantry brigade and its equipment across the island. When those helicopters went down with the ship, the land campaign became a foot march. Men who had expected to be helicoptered into position walked instead. Equipment that had been assigned helicopter lift had to be man-carried or abandoned. The Falklands land campaign became, to an extent that was never anticipated in planning, an exercise in physical endurance. Into that environment, where everything was limited by what men could carry, and where weather and terrain had degraded every asset that the task force had expected to use, 8 8-ton vehicles became disproportionately significant. They could carry their own ammunition. They could provide their own fire support. They could move across the terrain under their own power. In a campaign that was short of nearly everything, the CVRTs represented a capability that the Argentine defenders had no equivalent for and no prepared response to. The night of June 11 to 12 brought the first major coordinated British assault on the Argentine defensive perimeter around Stanley. 3 para attacked Mount Longdon in one of the most intense close-quarters infantry battles since Korea, a fight conducted in darkness, on a rocky ridge, against an Argentine garrison that had prepared its positions for months. The CVRTs moved forward to support positions, their engines giving them a tactical mobility in darkness that wheeled vehicles could not have matched. 42. Commando took Mount Harriet in a night attack that relied on silent approach and surprise. 45 Commando took Two Sisters after a firefight that lasted into daylight. The ring around Stanley was tightening. The defenders knew the final assault was coming. The night of June 13th would decide it. Para attacked Wireless Ridge with artillery preparation and the direct fire support of the Blues and Royals, Scorpions and Scimitars. The vehicles moved into hull-down positions below the Argentine defensive line and opened fire. The Scorpions' 76mm ammunition was not the heaviest available to the British land forces, but against infantry positions and light field fortifications, a 76mm round arriving at night from a vehicle that Argentine defenders could hear but not see in the darkness was sufficient. The volume of fire that 4 Scorpions and 4 Scimitars could sustain was equivalent to the fire support of a substantially larger infantry force. Argentine defenders on Wireless Ridge who attempted to move between positions or to reposition their weapons found that the darkness they had counted on for concealment was not providing the cover it should have. The image intensification sights on the British vehicles could resolve man-sized targets at ranges beyond 800 meters, in conditions where the naked eye saw nothing. The defenders could not see the vehicles that were killing them. The Argentine positions collapsed. 2 para entered Stanley on the morning of June 14th with their armored support. The Scots Guards, similarly supported by Scimitars on Tumbledown to the south, had broken the final Argentine defensive line. The surrender was signed at 2159 hours local time on June 14, 1982. Not one of the 8 CVRTs deployed to the Falklands was lost to enemy fire. 1 Scimitar was destroyed by its own crew after becoming irretrievably bogged in soft ground to prevent capture. 7 vehicles survived the campaign mechanically operational. The crews who brought them had driven them across terrain that professional military assessment had declared impassable for armor, through weather and darkness and ground conditions that would have destroyed heavier vehicles before the first engagement, and had delivered decisive fire support at the moment it was most needed. The Jaguar car engines, which critics had pointed to as evidence of the vehicle's unseriousness, had run continuously through the campaign without catastrophic failure. The CVRT continued in British Army service for decades after the Falklands. The Scimitar was progressively upgraded and served in the Gulf War, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Iraq. In the Gulf War, Scimitars operated ahead of the main armored thrust into Iraq with the 1st Armored Division, conducting reconnaissance across desert terrain where their speed gave them an advantage that the heavier Challenger 1 tanks behind them could not replicate. In Bosnia, CVRTs patrolled routes through terrain that would have challenged heavier vehicles in winter conditions. In Iraq after 2003, Scimitars operated in support of operations in urban and semi-urban environments, where their compact size allowed movement through streets and alleyways that the Warriors and Challengers could not navigate. The 30mm Rardin, which had been criticized in the Falklands as insufficient for anti-armor work, proved extremely effective against the light-skinned vehicles and prepared positions that characterized the Iraqi insurgency. In Afghanistan, CVRT variants operated in support of operations that heavier vehicles could not reach by road and in temperatures that stressed heavier engines more severely than the Jaguar-derived unit. The vehicle was replaced in British service by the Ajax reconnaissance vehicle, a program that became one of the most troubled procurement programs in British defense history, repeatedly delayed and over budget, with crews reporting vibration damage to their hearing during trials. As of 2026, Ajax remains in limited service while CVRT variants continue to be operated in reduced but active numbers. The toy has outlasted multiple programs intended to replace it and remains the most combat-proven light-armored vehicle in British Army history. The weight of the lesson from the Falklands is not primarily about the CVRT's capabilities. It is about the assumption that armor requires weight to be effective. That assumption is embedded in the procurement decisions of every major military, in the design priorities of every main battle tank program, in the doctrine that equates mass with lethality. The Scorpion and Scimitar on Wireless Ridge on the night of June 13th weighed 8 tons each in terrain, where a vehicle weighing 50 tons would have been irrelevant before the first shot was fired. Their effectiveness was not despite their lightness. It was because of it. The terrain selected for them. The darkness selected for them. The specific tactical requirements selected for them. 8 vehicles the military consensus had dismissed as toys arrived at the moment of decision in the only form that could have arrived there at all. They were small, because being small was the only way to be present. And they were present when it mattered.